Well, last weekend's Canadian Grand Prix was a hugely contentious race. The crowd were booing on the podium. We had social media, all manner of complaints about the decision to give a penalty to Sebastian Vettel. And rather than talking about the specific incident, we thought we'd look a little bit at the wider landscape and what Formula One can do to avoid these unsatisfactory situations where the winner on the road is not the actual race winner. I'm joined by John Noble and Scott Mitchell to discuss the issue. So, John, I mean, in general terms, I think we can agree it is bad for Formula One to have dissatisfied crowds. I know you'll get booing and you get heroes and villains in sport, but it's not good for Formula One to have so much widespread unhappiness, is it?
I think judging by website traffic, judging by what we've seen on social media, judging by what people are talking about, judging by the passion and engagement of fans, whichever your opinion is that it was the right or wrong decision, you know, F1 thrives on controversy. You can say it's bad that we shouldn't have races like this, but we've stopped talking about Mercedes dominance. We've stopped talking about tyre thread thickness and getting tyres into the right operating windows. We've got the kind of controversy that, you know, we follow Formula One for. It's an incident we'll talk about for weeks. It could be a defining, you know, moment for Ferrari. It's another moment where we see Sebastian Vettel make a mistake. I think there's lots of hallmarks. So to say this was a terrible day for Formula One and, you know, gravestone on the sport, I think is incorrect, because these are the days that kind of we live for and love talking about, and people will be following it and wanting reaction and insight going forwards.
Well, that's very true. And actually, Scott, whenever this happens, you always get people in droves saying they're never watching Formula One again. Of course they will. And sport does thrive on controversy to an extent. So I think John has a point there. But is there anything Formula One can learn from this? Or do you just say sometimes this kind of thing happens?
I think there is something to learn from it. I think it's very much worthwhile for the F1's rulemakers and the teams and even the drivers to sit down together and use this as an opportunity to establish how, if at all, the rules of racing conduct need to be changed. Because the problem with criticising what the stewards did and the problem with suggesting that F1's broken and people can't race is it's futile when nothing untoward was done by the stewards. It was the right decision based on how the rule book's written at the moment, and you can't. By extension, you can only fix that. You can only have better racing, harder racing, as Toto Wolff put it, if you address the rule book. So that needs to change, and exactly what you change is open to debate. It can be about relaxing it slightly so that there's greater interpretation. It can be about, you could maybe eliminate the ability for an in-race time penalty. One of the arguments for doing a time penalty like that in the race is so that, okay, even if they're in certain positions when they cross the line, the classification is then set. So there, you don't have a result and then 3 hours later it turns out the result changes because of a post-race penalty. So that's one of the arguments there. I think the main thing for me is that people want these black and white rules, and that's what we've got, but then they're unhappy when these black and white rules get applied. So, you know, what can you do? I don't think we want to open up F1 to the point where it's bumper cars. That would be absolutely stupid. But the bottom line is that the way F1 is at the moment, the way the cars are, the rules are, the pecking order and the competitive differences between the teams are, it's really hard to get two cars at the front fighting each other. How often have we actually seen Lewis Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel go wheel to wheel? It's really, really rare, and it's important for F1 to have those battles. We had one of those today. We had a chance. There was a genuine incident between the top two today, and because of the way the rules are, it killed the race basically. So it's hard enough for F1 to be interesting at the moment on track. And rules like that don't help. I agree completely with what John said. Controversies like this are the lifeblood of F1. So I don't believe that this is a death knell for F1 or racing or anything like that. But I do believe it's an opportunity for them to sort of look at what's wrong and what can be improved for the future.
The 5-second penalty Vettel got, the way these penalties work, they are either served at the next pit stop or they are served after the race. Now, there wasn't another pit stop. So that was the situation. I think if that happened earlier in the race before the pit stops, people would have been less frustrated about it. So is there a way to tackle this particular problem of penalties that would otherwise be served at pit stops, but when there's no pit stops to come?
Yeah, I think what made the fans certainly angry at the end of the race was the fact that they'd seen a red Ferrari come across the line first, and then the car that came across second was the race winner, and we all knew it was happening. So that's very unsatisfactory if you're a paying punter. You want to know that the battle you're seeing is actually what is happening. I know you may need an investigation an hour later and things can change afterwards, but I think during an event it's important that the guy who crosses the finish line first is the race winner. I know MotoGP's got this system called the long lap penalty. So in the event of, say, Sebastian Vettel having his 5-second penalty, he would have been told there's a certain section of the track, and if he goes around it, it costs him 5 seconds. So he would have dropped behind Lewis Hamilton, then it's game on again for the race. We'd have seen the battle carry on, potentially Lewis, would have had to fight off Vettel coming back, but you'd have seen the real race and the real winner from then on. So I think there are ways of making sure that when a penalty is handed out and the pit stop option isn't there, that this penalty is given out, and then the fans are seeing the proper race. And you can argue later it's a fair penalty, it was an unfair penalty, but at least we're seeing the race winner cross the finish line first.
I think it's an interesting point as well. Scott was talking about the black and white penalties. I personally would like to see a little bit more flexibility for the stewards, because the trouble is people talk about consistency. No two incidents are absolutely identical. They just aren't. Circumstances are different, and millimetres can make a difference between legitimate and not legitimate. And I think as soon as you give people a set of rules that have to be applied to the letter, which the stewards have to, often their hands are tied and they may well think, actually, we'd rather not done this, but actually we do have to. So that would have allowed maybe a little bit more flexibility to say that's on the edge, but we're going to let that one go.
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem of having a rule book, and when someone gets a punishment, like Max Verstappen in Japan last year, precedent's set, and then you can't suddenly punish that one. Max says, why did you punish me, and let Sebastian get away with it here? So you need to have consistency of the stewards is hugely important, and maybe a bit more of an explanation about why these decisions are taken. What are the factors? What is classified as a unsafe rejoining of the track and forcing a driver off? When isn't it? I think there was an incident in Monaco in 2016. Lewis Hamilton ran wide at the chicane, leading the race with Daniel Ricciardo behind him. Coming out of the chicane, Lewis pulls to the right just to squeeze off, knowing that Daniel could get a run on him. Now, some are arguing what's the difference between that and what happened to Sebastian. So there are always these incidents. You won't have a hard, fast rule that says this can be treated one way and this isn't. So you do need a bit of flexibility, but I don't think anyone likes penalties interfering with results. We want to see racing, we want to see wheel to wheel. And I think what was so frustrating about Canada was that it was the battle we've been waiting for. The two cars at the front, wheel to wheel, very little separated them. Two in the front, it was all building up to a nice crescendo, and it was all wiped away through the decision to punish for Sebastian.
Well, Scott, do you think it's realistic to expect there to be a change? These regulations are built up over quite a few years. People have called for this consistency, this rule book, and this is the consequence of it. So it would require quite a significant change for Formula One. Is this a time for F1 to really look into that, or do you think just roll the punches, everyone will forget this in a few days and move on?
Well, how long have we been waiting for the 2021 overhaul to be finalised? It was first proposed, 14 odd months ago now. It now feels sort of, if it's ever going to be, it just feels less likely than ever, and it feels watered down all the time. And so any time F1 tries to, create fundamental change or implement something new, people have just different vested interests, don't they? So there will be, the FIA would argue something, F1 might counter it and say, you need this for the show. The drivers are going to say, well, hang on, we know best because we're the guys that are actually out there racing. So I can appreciate it when people like Toto say, I really want to sit down and have this discussion, but I just know how F1 works or doesn't work, and change is glacial if it ever happens, or it comes in a weird compromise, and that's the last thing you need, at least at the moment. And this goes back to why it's so frustrating that there's been this outcry, because the rules as written, as we've said at length, it's not a problem. So at least with the situation you've got now, you do have a set of rules where everyone knows where they stand, even if it's not maybe not the most ideal for racing, or in special circumstances like this where the result gets changed after the flag compared to what you see on the track. But is that better than a halfway house, because they strive for something that's meant to create really robust hard racing and actually just creates a bit of a confusing situation, and it just ends up messy? I don't really know. I wouldn't personally put my trust in F1 or the rule makers to actually fix this situation if it does need fixing.
Well, I think that's certainly the case in Formula One. Change on a big scale is very, very difficult to achieve. I guess the one thing is, it's been a long time since this last happened. I think the Belgian Grand Prix in 2008 at Spa, where Lewis Hamilton went on the road and was given a post-race penalty at 25 seconds, it equated to, that allowed Felipe Massa to win for... That was Hamilton gaining advantage by cutting the chicane. That was the last time that a winner on the road was penalised after the checkered flag. So at least this is relatively rare, but this is at least an opportunity for Formula One to have a think about what it wants to do and the way it wants to deal with such problems in the future.